It's May 2nd, 1945. A U.S. Army private stands guard at a remote mountain in Austria. News of Hitler's suicide just reaches him. The war is nearly over. Soon, he will go home to America. Then, he sees a figure speeding down the mountain on a bicycle. A young man, blonde hair, civilian clothes, but he can't tell if the man is friend or foe. The soldier raises his weapon, ordering the man to stop. He does. In broken English, the man speaks. He's one of many Nazi scientists who went into hiding. He says the Nazis ordered their deaths to prevent capture and protect their secrets. But the scientists want to surrender. They want to help. They offer to share the secrets of Hitler's deadly V-2 rocket. The soldier stares at him. He's wearing a gray leather coat, a bold claim. But can he trust him? After all, he's a Nazi. Yet if this is true, it could change the world. This is Veil, where the past's darkest secrets are revealed. Today, we expose Operation Paperclip, America's secret deal with Nazi scientists buried for decades, until 1998, when the truth was finally unleashed.
You who have not seen it do not know what hell looks like from the top. That's what Germany looks like.
After World War II, the US granted asylum to Nazi scientists under Operation Paperclip. Despite their war crimes, they went on to achieve monumental success in America, contributing to projects like the Apollo 11 moon landing. Their past was whitewashed, exposing the cost of America's rise as a superpower. In 1944, the US faces a dilemma: the war in Europe against Nazi Germany, the war in the Pacific against Japan. Victory is close, but the war is not over. The US military is thinking beyond World War II. They want to ensure global dominance, even if it means crossing lines. In 1945, the US launches Operation Paperclip. They want to capture key German scientists before the Soviets, British, or French do. These scientists are not just experts in military weapons. They're pioneers in rocketry, biology, and chemistry. They possess knowledge 25 years ahead of the US. If the US gets them first, they solidify their place as the post-war superpower. But who are these men? How many are war criminals? And what price does America pay to bring them over? In February 1945, Major Robert B. Staver sits in his London office. Stacks of documents cover his desk, maps cover the walls, all about the Germans' V-2 rocket, a weapon that flies at supersonic speeds and strikes silently. Staver leads the jet propulsion section of the US Army Ordnance Corps. His job is to gather intel on the V-2, who's building it, where, and how. Staver's about to post new reconnaissance photos when there's a knock. His assistant enters with a thick manila envelope. Staver grumbles, he's busy, but she insists it's important. He takes the envelope. His eyes widen as he pulls out the contents. A list. 15,000 German scientists, 1,400 Nazi research facilities. The list's description explains that it was found half flushed down a toilet at the University of Bonn. As American troops close in, Nazi scientists working there try to destroy it, but US soldiers find the list before it's gone. Thanks to Nazi record-keeping, US intelligence reconstructs the full list. It's a goldmine. It's extensive. Each scientist's address, their loyalty to the regime, personal details that could be used to force their cooperation. Staver's hands shake. He's been researching these people for months, gathering hundreds of names. But now, he holds something bigger, 10 times bigger. The Allies can now knock on the doors of the very people responsible for creating these weapons. A few months later, in the spring of 1945, Staver arrives in Nordhausen. He's after V-2 rocket parts and blueprints. They're supposedly hidden in an underground weapons facility, Mittelwerk. As Staver approaches the facility, the stench of death fills the air. He watches as American soldiers dig mass graves. Thousands of bodies from the nearby Nordhausen Dora slave labor camp. Prisoners forced to assemble the V-2 rockets. They were starved, denied water, worked to death. When quotas weren't met, 12 prisoners at a time were hung for the rest to see, their bodies left hanging above the production lines. The rest die from hunger, disease, and exhaustion. In 6 months, nearly 3,000 people perish. Staver shakes off the horror. He has a job to do, one that might make up for some of the wrongs committed by the Nazis. The unit enters the underground tunnel at Mittelwerk. Dust chokes the air. Rubble covers the floor. Staver steps forward, and the dust clouds around him. He clears his throat, wipes his eyes, and signals his men to follow. They continue through the dark, narrow passage. A flash of metal catches Staver's eye. He crouches, brushing away debris. A V-2 rocket part. He calls out. The men gather around. They push aside more rubble and uncover more parts. Staver orders a group to collect the materials while he leads the others onward. Hours later, they've recovered 400 tons of rocket parts. A crane helps load them onto rail cars bound for Antwerp. From there, they'll be sent to the US. Staver feels a sense of accomplishment. But there's still one thing left to find: the blueprints. Without them, the US can't replicate the V-2 rocket. On May 12th, Staver arrives at an unassuming house in Nordhausen. He straightens his uniform before knocking on the door. Karl Otto Fleischer, a V-2 rocket scientist, opens it. Fleischer looks tired, but Staver knows not to underestimate him. Fleischer asks what Staver wants. Staver's been bribing locals with cans of Spam and cigarettes, but this time it won't work. He lies. He tells Fleischer that the Americans have his superiors in custody. He demands to know where the V-2 plans are hidden. Staver presses. He says Fleischer can tell him the location or he'll go to jail. Fleischer hesitates. Staver waits. After a moment, Fleischer gives in. He says the plans are buried in an abandoned mine, 30 miles away. The mine is guarded by a loyal Nazi. Fleischer knows how to get past him, but there's a catch. The Nazis sealed the mine entrance with dynamite. If Staver wants the documents, they'll need pickaxes and a dozen local miners to clear the way. Staver agrees immediately. A small price to pay for such crucial information. If Staver can find the V-2 plans first, the US can build their own version and use it against Japan, which still hasn't surrendered. But Staver knows the missile could give the US a new weapon, one far more powerful than anything the Soviets possess. If the Soviets find the plans first, Staver shudders at the thought of how they might use the V-2 to dominate the world. A few days later, Staver stands at the entrance to Dorton Mine. Local miners are working, digging through rubble, blocking the entrance. Staver managed to get the US Army to pay them for their help. But now comes the true test. Was Fleischer lying, or are the V-2 blueprints really inside? As Staver steps aside, a rock flies by his head. The miners break through the last of the debris. They drop their shovels, signaling that they're done. Staver rushes forward and steps into the dark tunnel, shining his flashlight around. To his delight, he sees crates stacked high, filled with documents. He picks up a sheet of paper from the top pile. It's the V-2 rocket plans. But time is running out. The Soviets aren't the only ones after this information. British soldiers are set to arrive in Nordhausen on May 27th to oversee the region's transition from US to Soviet control. The US promised the Brits that they would share all V-2 knowledge. If they find out the US Army is trying to smuggle the documents to America, they won't be happy. The next day, Staver hunches over a P-47 Thunderbolt fighter plane. It's small and his head brushes the ceiling, but he doesn't care. He begged the pilot for a ride to Paris. Staver needs to get to Ordnance headquarters to secure transport for the V-2 documents. He rubs his temples, thinking about another matter he needs to handle while he's there. It's risky, but it's crucial. US national security depends on it. Hours later, Staver sits across from Colonel Joel Holmes. Holmes runs the Army's technical division, the only man who can secure trucks to move the V-2 documents from Dorton Mine. Staver explains the situation. Holmes agrees immediately to send trucks. Staver hesitates before asking for something else. He tells Holmes about the list found half flushed down a toilet. It led to 400 top Nazi scientists. These men were responsible for developing the V-2 rocket. Their knowledge is 25 years ahead of the US. And though the Americans have little leverage, they agree to help. Staver shares his plan. He wants to bring these scientists to America. Holmes processes the information, then looks up at Staver. He tells Staver to write a cable to the Pentagon, recommending that the US bring these scientists over to prevent losing them to rival nations. Days later, Staver arrives at the Garmisch-Partenkirchen ski resort in southern Germany. Back in 1936, it hosted the Winter Olympics. Now, it's where high-ranking Nazi scientists are kept under US protection. Staver notices Werner von Braun, a renowned German scientist, sunbathing. Von Braun had been a senior official at Mittelwerk and a member of the Nazi Party. But the US Army considers the resort the safest place for him. Staver feels inner conflict. If he convinces von Braun to come back to the US, he'll escape the Nuremberg trials. But if he doesn't, the Soviets will surely recruit him. Staver approaches von Braun. He offers him a choice: come to America with Staver, bring his family, and work for the US government, or stay here and wait for the Soviets. Von Braun thinks it over. Then he extends his hand to Staver. He agrees to follow. Back in Nordhausen, Staver and von Braun arrive at the American camp. The handful of other high-ranking scientists at the resort have also agreed to come. But Staver's work isn't done. He still has hundreds of other scientists to convince. Once von Braun is settled, Staver visits the barracks where he's staying. He pulls out a stack of note cards from his jacket pocket, showing von Braun the names and addresses of the other V2 engineers. Von Braun agrees to help track down the men and recruit them. Staver rushes out to the megaphone and instructs every available US soldier to round up trucks, motorcycles, and even donkey carts. They're setting off on a mission through the Harz Mountains to find the remaining scientists and their families. In November 1940, Werner von Braun, Nazi Germany's most celebrated scientist, walks into his two-story barracks at Fort Bliss, Texas. He's exhausted after a long day at the Army base's lab. Inside, the barracks are humble: cracked floors, small bedrooms. He enters the kitchen, almost tripping over cockroaches skittering from under the sink. Von Braun slumps at the kitchen table, hands over his face. This is nothing like his home in Germany, or the Bavarian ski resort he had come from. The Americans saved him from execution, but this isn't what he expected. Few of the people at Fort Bliss know about his Nazi past. He's just another German scientist helping the US develop intermediate-range ballistic missiles. But von Braun's patience is running thin. He spent the day arguing with Army officials over equipment. The Americans want him to build the world's best missiles, but refuse to provide the resources. In Germany, he had everything he needed. Here, the US is counting pennies. He runs his hand along the paint-chipped wall. It's still better than being captured by the Soviets. They would have punished him for the thousands of deaths under his watch. Here, he only faces cockroaches. For the next decade, von Braun teaches Americans how to launch rockets and guided missiles, including some V2 rockets smuggled from Germany. He and his colleagues joke they're POPs, prisoners of peace. They're free, but still bound by restrictions. They can't leave Fort Bliss without an escort. 12 years later, on October 4th, 1957, von Braun jumps from his desk at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. His phone rings. The Soviet Union has launched Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite. Von Braun can't believe it. After years of developing weapons, he's now focused on the space program, working on the Jupiter-C rocket. But Sputnik changes everything. He knows he needs to speak to Neil Hosier McElroy, the soon-to-be US Secretary of Defense. At a reception at Redstone, von Braun explains to McElroy that the US can still win the space race. Jupiter-C is almost ready. They just need a few more rocket parts. McElroy agrees to fast-track the project. Less than 4 months later, on January 31st, 1958, von Braun watches as Jupiter-C launches from Washington, D.C. He holds his breath as the rocket sends Explorer 1, America's first satellite, into space. The launch is a success. The US has caught up to the Soviets. Thanks to von Braun, America is now a global superpower. On June 16, 1977, 65-year-old Werner von Braun lies in a hospital bed in Alexandria, Virginia. He's pale, weak. 4 years earlier, he was diagnosed with cancer. As he stares out the window, von Braun thinks about his last 2 decades in America. After the success of Explorer 1, he became a hero. In 1960, his expertise led him to the Marshall Space Center in Huntsville, Alabama. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, has just been formed, and von Braun is tapped to be its first director. He jumps at the opportunity. As the center's director, von Braun oversees the development of rockets that will eventually lead to the 1969 Apollo 11 moon landing. In 1970, he becomes NASA's Deputy Associate Administrator for Planning. He spends 3 years in this role before his cancer diagnosis forces him to step down. A gentle knock on von Braun's hospital room door pulls him from his thoughts. He looks up to see a nurse approach his bed. Her voice is full of excitement as she tells him he has a very important phone call. It's Vice President Nelson Rockefeller. Von Braun is too weak to hold the phone, so the nurse places it by his ear. Rockefeller tells him he is being awarded the Medal of Science in Engineering. The Vice President will present it to him tomorrow. But later that day, von Braun takes his last breath. He's just a day shy of receiving the medal in person, and instead, he's posthumously awarded the Medal of Science in Engineering. With his death, von Braun narrowly avoids facing justice again. If von Braun had stayed in Germany in 1945, he would likely have been questioned during the Nuremberg trials. Nearly 200 former Nazis take the stand, and 37 are sentenced to death. But while others are sent to the gallows, von Braun is in Fort Bliss, building rockets for the US military. Now, in 1907, von Braun succumbs to cancer, 8 years before the truth about him would finally be revealed to the world. In 1985, CNN reporter Linda Hunt publishes a bombshell story that changes how Americans view von Braun. When President Truman approved Operation Paperclip in 1946, he knew the US was facing an uphill battle. The US Army wanted to bring hundreds of German scientists to America to develop military and aerospace technology. Some of these scientists were good Nazis, military officials argue, people who had been forced to work for the regime after being blackmailed or threatened. But others were ardent supporters of the Third Reich. These individuals shared Hitler's racist ideology and even ran their own concentration camps. US officials knew that the public would never accept these scientists if they knew the truth about their past. When reports of Operation Paperclip began to surface in the 1940s, Robert Patterson, Undersecretary of War at the time, devised a plan. He assured the public that only the good Nazis would be brought to the US. Patterson instructed Army intelligence officers to attach paperclips to the files of scientists who were ardent Nazis, to exclude them from the program. Based on his war record, Wernher von Braun was likely one of the scientists who got a paperclip. But as it turns out, paperclips weren't a foolproof system. Over time, most of these paperclips mysteriously disappeared. Without an official list of the most notorious Nazis, Patterson and other officials were able to whitewash the scientists' war crimes and grant them US visas, including the worst of them. Using the Freedom of Information Act, Linda Hunt accessed government records detailing von Braun's involvement with Hitler and the Third Reich. It turned out he was most certainly an ardent Nazi. In November 1933, von Braun joins the SS, Hitler's brutal paramilitary group. Later, he claims his involvement was limited to taking horseback riding lessons. But by 1937, von Braun officially joins the Nazi Party. By the time the Nordhausendorfer slave labor concentration camp is established in 1943, von Braun has been working on the V-2 rocket for years. He becomes the head of the camp, where 1,300 French and Russian prisoners are forced to assemble V-2 machinery. In the winter of 1943, an estimated 20 prisoners die each day under von Braun's leadership. With fewer skilled technicians available, von Braun himself travels to the nearby Buchenwald concentration camp, handpicking prisoners to bring to Nordhausendorfer. By the time the camp shuts down in April 1945, an estimated 20,000 people have died there from hangings, death marches, and brutal working conditions. When Hunt publishes her report in 1985, Americans and government officials are outraged. 40 years have passed since von Braun and other Nazi scientists were brought to the US, where they had received nothing but accolades. Many now believe it's time for these scientists to be held accountable for their crimes. But there's a problem. Millions of pages of wartime and post-war records on von Braun and the others remain classified. After Hunt's report, Congress, government prosecutors, historians, and war crime victims lobby for access to these records. It takes another 13 years before the truth is finally made public. In 1998, 8.5 million pages of records are declassified. But for many Americans, it's too little, too late. He was alive. Von Braun escaped justice at the Nuremberg trials and continued to be lauded as an American hero. His Medal of Science and Engineering was never rescinded. In 2021, NASA employees urged the agency to remove a bust of von Braun from their headquarters. NASA complies, but his name still adorns a research hall at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, where von Braun helped develop the Apollo moon program. Similarly, Nazi doctor Theodor Benzinger, granted asylum in the US. After the war, receives a glowing obituary in the New York Times when he dies in '99, without mention of his gruesome experiments on concentration camp prisoners. German physiologist Hubertus Strughold had an award named after him, which the Space Medicine Association gave to top aviation researchers. When Strughold's Nazi past comes to light in 2013, the award is retired. All these years later, the question remains, was Operation Paperclip worth it? Thanks to the operation and Wernher von Braun, the US maintained dominance over the Soviet Union and other communist powers. Von Braun played a key role in military and aerospace advancements, including the Apollo 11 moon landing. But he was also responsible for the deaths of thousands, including those in the concentration camps, and for advancing Nazi supremacy through the V-2 rocket. So, was it worth it? Was it worth aligning with some of history's most brutal figures to advance military technology? If the US hadn't recruited these scientists, another ally would have, but the moral cost remains. Operation Paperclip is a stain on America's claim to be a force for justice in the world.